psychotherapists have to have some political awareness in their work, and there has to be a political dimension.
When completely understanding
Mhm.
a person, they're situated in the context of society, and the broader living conditions do impact the way that they are shaped as a person and their ongoing living opportunities and situations.
Neurodivergent people and late discovery autistic adults in particular, it's big, it's not even like a small bit that you slot in somewhere. Those very personal questions about how has the life I've led up to now affected me? Where do I stand in the world now? And, what reactions am I going to get? A lot of the answers to that lie in the societal political domain. The four quadrants is still part then of the sort of background or structure or framework. We said we might talk a bit about that today.
Yes, yeah, because of it being part of the whole thing that we start the course off with, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
I was on a training course actually, a CPD thing, in the spring, and what the tutor at the time was talking about systemic things and political influences that, and someone literally put in the chat, well, not just one person, two or three people put in the chat, why are you bringing politics into therapy, into psychotherapy?
Oh, right. That's interesting in this day and age.
I know.
Yeah.
And of course, why are we? That's the question, isn't it? Why are we? Why do we have the four realms to consider when completely understanding a person? They're situated in the context of society, and the broader living conditions do impact the way that they are shaped as a person, and their ongoing living opportunities and situations, really.
And the underlying assumptions that, they grow up with that are just part of that. That's kind of structure, power structures that they're born into. Yeah.
Yeah, or move into, depending, because, can move into different pockets of being a member of a particular, group of person that's classified in a certain way as according to what its systems and institutions might classify you as part of. That's what I mean.
I mean, it's interesting, that reaction. I remember when I was a young therapist in the 90s. I mean, youngish as a person, but very young as a therapist, like relatively recently qualified and maybe a few years of experience or whatever working. I remember meeting a more experienced therapist, and, kind of was very struck by her, as in just really interested in her take on things, and had great respect and admiration for her. Sadly, she has died since. Not that she wasn't that old, but I remember her saying back then. So that was probably maybe mid-90s or late 90s. So like maybe over 25 years ago. I remember her saying something about psychotherapists have to have some political awareness in their work, and there has to be a political dimension. And I didn't disagree, I wasn't kind of saying, well, why would we, and you're wrong, but I didn't quite get it. I kind of remember puzzling over it a good bit afterwards, and maybe talked to her again about it. I can't remember, but I certainly at that time, I didn't quite get quite what that meant. I know, looking back, I didn't, obviously, yeah, over time that's changed, and certainly being involved in this line of work where, primarily focusing on working with neurodivergent people and late discovery autistic adults in particular at this point in history, yeah, I mean, the political dimension is not only, sort of clear, but it's big, it's not even like a small bit that you slot in somewhere, no, and it's from what we're describing in terms of part of the framework of our course is that it's like the fourth of four quadrants or domains, personal, interpersonal, societal, political, I mean, you could pick three of those, you could add a fifth one, like there's no final model of these things. But I think it is useful and a bit eye-opening to just look at this particular theme of working with neurodivergent clients at this point in history under those four headings.
Yeah, because when we're thinking about the political realm, we're thinking, aren't we, about not only the systemic processes, but also actual laws, and policies and rules that impact autistic people.
Yep. I mean, that's kind of currently, in the air, in a lot of countries now, for in neurodivergent people, for autistic people, for instance. I mean, I know that quite a lot of people in Ireland, which is where I am, are closely watching what's going on there. A lot of professionals like myself, a lot of autistic people like myself, a lot of autistic people who aren't professionals, some who are very involved in advocacy, but not necessarily in a professional way, keeping a very close eye on where all of this is going, trying to influence it. And, the general feeling is pretty mixed, as in government are officially listening and have set up, sort of exploratory groups and things like that. And people have had a chance to input into those things. A couple of documents have emerged. One came out recently, a policy document, not legislation, just a policy kind of statement. Most people I've talked to, including myself, most of our reaction is kind of a lot of words, not an awful lot of substance, and certainly nothing that they would have to hold themselves to that's going to cost anything, and no discussion that I know of any kind of actual move towards either reviewing legislation or current direct policies that really impact on people very directly, or that, as I say, would involve funding. So at that level of politics, as well as more subtle levels of politics, it's a live issue, I think.
What would you like to see developed then?
Well, like for instance, I think that certainly here a lot of people. I work with adults and older adolescents. I don't work with children. I work sometimes with, clients who are just finishing secondary school, so they're maybe, 18, that kind of age, 17, 18. So I work just about with people going to school and the transition out of school. But other than that, I wouldn't work with anyone, people under 17 myself. So I'm not directly involved mostly in the school experience, but of course, every one of us has had school experience. Every client has, including every autistic client. I think a lot of people would like to see a very much quicker moves around changing things at the school level. Just some proper serious planning, education of staff, of teachers and principals, and of course funding, because at the moment, like in lots of countries, it's kind of it's add-on. It's a bit of a special needs assistant here and a bit of a what they call an autism unit over here, which is just a separate class that autistic children might go to at least some of the time, not necessarily all of the time, depending on the school and the size of the school, and kind of just workarounds. I heard Kieran Rose say that recently. He said, accommodations are not inclusion. He doesn't like the word accommodations at all. It's like an accommodation is an add-on. Inclusion, you don't need add-ons because everyone's included. So I think a lot of people, what they'd most like to see, and I would agree, even though I'm less directly involved in that area, would be real serious thought given to and action taken around changes at the school experience for autistic children and children with ADHD. I saw a statistic recently, I don't know, somewhere on LinkedIn, somebody posting some article I can't remember where it was based, whether it was UK based or where, but something like that, like 97% of children who have difficulty attending school are neurodivergent, something like that.
Oh,
Yeah,
wow.
yeah,
Wow.
yeah. By the way, I'm interested. I mentioned schools there in response to you asking me that question, but I thought of schools earlier in another context, and that is where schools fit into that kind of set of domains or quadrants, because I think if you say personal, interpersonal, societal, political, a lot of people would put schools into the societal. They're where people meet society and are where they are on a daily basis, where they live a lot of the time. When you're that age, you spend a lot of time at school. But of course, the angle I'm talking about it from is schools are highly political. They're very much a political part of the picture we all live with. They're not only, very the nature of them is influenced by the political system, but of course many people would say their part of their function is to replicate the political system, which is a deeper way of looking at it. And that has huge implications for neurodivergent people, because neurodivergent people need the whole system to change and make more room and inclusion for them, So I think there's quite deep political issues in behind schooling anyway. That's a whole interesting territory. Yeah, so that's the one that would first occur to me, I think. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's the other thing, isn't it? Is that you can't separate out these realms. They all interact with each other. So while we're talking about like the political realm being around the decisions that are made and the policies and the things, that inform how things are carried out, whereas with the social realm, we're talking more about the collective attitudes and beliefs of people in society, of groups, and that are carried across groups of people rather than individuals, but they come from sometimes, don't they, or they're born out of what gets considered to be official decisions, or the way to go, or it sort of leads thoughts and attitudes, in that way, doesn't it?
Some kind of a bit more implicit and not necessarily said straight out, but maybe again, it's just seen in people's behavior, and then other people feel they need to behave the same way. But a lot of it explicit, a lot of it, yeah, this is how we are and how we should be. Yes. How on earth could you be a different way, Absolutely. Yeah.
Even just taking what you said about it being an add-on, that that's something provided for autistic children as an add-on. And one example might be that there's a class that autistic or some autistic children may go to, but not all the time. Even that is giving the message. It's an underlying message of they have to be separate. There has to be something different about them, and they have to be taken away from the mainstream. And we know that that's been historically a big problem and trauma for autistic people. In the 40s, people were institutionalized if they were autistic.
Yeah, that's right.
Taken out of society, put into different places.
Yeah. Yeah. Even later than that, many autistic people were diagnosed as having intellectual disability, even though not all of them did. I worked in the field of intellectual disability in the 80s, so before I moved into the field of counselling and psychotherapy. And I remember at least one young man that I worked with, I'd be convinced that he was autistic, but that he didn't have any intellectual disability. I think he just didn't fit into the school system, and parents didn't know what to do with them except to find them a place within an institutional setting for people with an intellectual disability. And he wasn't, therefore well educated. He hadn't spent much of his life in the school system, so of course he could come across as somebody with an intellectual disability. So yeah, that was in Ireland in the 80s, so yeah, there's a lot of kind of the not pretty, underground of society kind of comes to the surface sometimes when a minority calls for attention and says, hold on, we're here too, And again, I think that's the bit, like if we say personal, interpersonal, societal, political as a kind of a list, but I think, as you say, they're linked, like political links all the way back to personal then. So it's more like a kind of a circle. And I think that's the way sometimes you present it. But it's like, yeah, I do have some of these kind of discussions with clients, you know.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
back to those very personal questions about who am I and how do I figure out more of who I am and how has the life I've led up to now affected me. And now that I know I'm autistic or autistic and ADHD, what does that actually mean? And, you know, and where do I stand in the world now? And, you know, what are my possible choices and what do I not have much choice around? And, you know, what reactions am I going to get? You know, like a lot of the answers to that lie in the societal political domain, as in, well, if you want some thoughts on that, you know, well, here's some thoughts, or here's something you could read, or you know, go and check out those questions online, or seek out some books because those questions are being explored at the moment. It's like how has this affected individuals who are now questioning and now wondering, how did I end up with half my life being a mess? You know, where do I go from here? You know.
And the other thing you see, of course, is that when we're talking about society having attitudes about autistic people, I was going to say against autistic people, but that wasn't
I think that's pretty
a
accurate.
Freudian slip there that I stand behind.
Yeah.
But of course, we are members of that society as well.
Yeah.
So as on the personal level, when we're talking about personal on our course, specifically, what we're meaning is the relationship with self, the concept of self, and the way, you know, the way that you think about yourself. Well, how are you going to think about yourself if you're one of the people in society that is holding those values as part of the collective?
Yeah.
You know, what's going to happen? It starts to bring some really interesting exploration there, some really interesting questions of how that could happen. You know, what happens intrapsychically there.
And, you know, I think that is partly what the therapist I mentioned earlier years ago meant, you know, when again I was asking her, well, what do you mean by, you know, psychotherapy has to be kind of political as well? You know, she didn't necessarily mean, you know, out marching with banners, though she wasn't against that, but if necessary. But partly, what I remember is that she meant, you know, like we represent society and the system.
Yeah.
To clients, you know.
And we're all influenced by it and impacted by it.
Of course.
Yeah.
And we're taken very seriously and we have power and we're given power by society. You know, there's these people you go to that are called therapists and, you know, they might help you and it's a good idea to listen to them, you know, and that kind of thing. But, you know, one of the things that most strikes me as a response to what you're bringing up there is simply that, and it's the kind of thing we, you know, discuss on the course and invite people to explore, is that any of us who have grown up over the last number of decades, we won't specify the number of decades, depending on who, you know, but anyone who's, you know, well into adulthood in our society, in Western society, has been influenced by that negative, stigmatized, against autism view that you mentioned, you know what I mean? Very narrow, very deficit based, very sort of stigmatized in the sense of, you know, open season for jokes and bullying and you know, autistic as a bit of a slur. You know, we've all grown up with some version of that. We may not think we've seen a lot of it, but on the other hand, whatever bits we have seen around how autistic people are viewed, that person who, you know, that person's child had to go into an institution, or the obvious examples of Rain Man and things like that. We've all internalized that. And like internalized, you know, racism, we can't just say, oh, now I don't have it. Now that I have the neurodiversity paradigm, that's just gone, you know? It's more healthy to say it must still be in me somewhere, even though we're autistic ourselves, that we still have some of that. And if we don't acknowledge we have it, we will be more dangerous than if we just say, look, we all have it, including me, and we just have to take it into account that it's there and keep watching out for it and its subtlety, you know, because I think that's a much more realistic view. I think any other view is potentially dangerous. Yeah.
And dangerous is a good word, isn't it? Because when you're thinking about internalized stigma, internalized ableism, internalized oppression, these are not nice things that go on within yourself, are they?
No,
Have
no.
that's what a lot of times we talk about in therapy. Once you get into more into those kinds of things about the conflicts and the ways in which people are in pain, autistic or not autistic, from these kinds of things. So, give us a chance, and to not create that in the first place would be a nice thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And again, school is a pretty crucial place. Coming back to that theme, I mean, kind of, exploring school experiences with clients might be an interesting thing to talk about sometime, actually. Because it's like it's such a big chunk of people's lives. Like if you meet somebody who's in their 20s or 30s, they've spent more than half their life in school. It's not until you get to your late 30s or early 40s that you get to the point where more than half of your life is outside of the school system, so late 30s or so. And so, and it's the formative years. So for any client of any kind, obviously talking about school experiences is pretty important. But I think for autistic and ADHD adults, it's just such a big piece. But anyway, maybe, as I say, that's a track to come back to another time. But again, these kind of, attitudes are just handed on, not always by putting them into words, more by just seeing the way people are treated, as an add-on, for instance, we have to do something. Yeah, this will do, that still gives the same message, as you said earlier, as the message of you're not really, you're second-class citizens in some way, is that.
Yeah, absolutely. I know. And how many warning messages does any person need to be able to take heed of something? In my view, we take heed of warnings much, much more swiftly than we do to messages of encouragement. You don't need many more messages of warning, do you, to know that I want to avoid that? That's a bad thing, even though you can't conceptualize it further. So from a very, very young age, people might pick up things and just sort of intuitively, like in a primitive kind of way, pick up the warning in that somehow. And then, that gets interpreted individually for each person, but largely speaking, based on what was genuinely being communicated and transmitted anyway.
Yeah. And,
wrong, bad and dangerous.
Usually. Well, one impact of that then, and this, can certainly apply in school, but it can equally apply in work, in a job setting, or even in a club of some kind, a hobby, a hiking group, whatever. And that is that if somebody picks up those kind of messages about somebody who's different, maybe neurodivergent, then that doesn't mean they'll be nasty to them, but it may well be that they'll kind of avoid them and won't want to be seen with associating with them, or won't want to be seen as allied with them or a friend of theirs, And that on its own, particularly if a number of people are affected that way, has a massive, massive, massive impact on that poor, unfortunate neurodivergent person,
And it might not be consistently applied, you see. There might be, these are subtle things, aren't they? In fact, actually, I'd like to draw on this. I was reading a survey the other day, actually, that I remembered. Dr. Luke Bearden, who ran the Sheffield, or still does, run the Sheffield Hallam course on autism. Bearden and Edmonds did a survey in 2007, and it was of autistic students. And they found that 83% of autistic participants surveyed felt strongly or very strongly that many of the greatest challenges they faced in life resulted directly from lack of acceptance and understanding of their differences by other persons with whom they worked and interacted with on a regular basis.
That's so sad, isn't it? And so,
so
enraging in a way as well, Yeah.
So it's like you're immersed in this social environment of these people that you like, you've got relationships with them of some sorts, and yet that's what it feels like.
Yeah. And that's where the societal breaks down into individual interactions, dyads, in the end of it all. Yeah. All
Mm-hmm.
those multiple interactions between people, those just every look you get, every time somebody doesn't talk to you, every time two people seem to be laughing about you when you walk in, whatever. These are the experiences that people carry, that go very deep. Yeah. And
Yeah, not being invited to
yeah,
things.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Mm.
That causes enormous distress and damage. That is traumatizing. Exclusion is one of the worst experiences that human beings can have. Um,
I think the thing with working with adults as well in therapy is that sometimes, we are working with autistic adults who have had decades of this going on. And in the beginning, there's like a desensitizing to it. There's like I get used to that kind of approach to keep sanity, really, to keep from crashing into poor mental health. I've noticed with a lot of clients that it's shrugged off as, well, what can you do? Or that doesn't really matter. Well, of course it does matter, but it's too painful to think about, or futile to think about it, because what can you do anyway? Such as not being invited to the barbecue that the people are having on the street and hearing the music, when you're in your own back garden and knowing that you haven't been invited, and things like that's painful, just painful.
Very painful. I mean, that's deeply painful. It certainly, as I imagine it, and as I recall similar things, it feels very painful. That sense of life is going on without you.
That's
You're
right.
on the outside. You're looking through the window.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there's a conflict there as well, though, isn't there? Because the autistic person might say, well, I wouldn't really want to go, actually, because I don't want to stand around with a burger in one hand and a glass of wine in the other, trying to talk about football or something with, I don't want to do that thing. But the feeling of being excluded from society, it's like a conceptual thing rather than an actual disappointment, isn't it? And so the answer is well, not the answer, but there's merit, isn't there, in thinking, where can I get social connection from, and how might I want to? Online communities, it is very appealing, isn't it, to autistic people?
To a fair few autistic people, but also just a smallish number of people that they feel they can connect with, on a maybe less regular basis than maybe a lot would be the neurotypical norm, like, the other thing I thought of before the podcast was, how important, you mentioned Luke Bearden there, so I'll mention Damien Milton. They get a lot of mentions here, but
They do.
And rightly. But the double empathy problem concept is just, along with the neurodiversity paradigm, it's probably the other simple, most important idea of the last 20 years or whatever. And like in the end of it all, you see, you can talk about that kind of, yes, autistic people are kind of caught because they also don't want to be, going to a big barbecue or whatever. Yeah, that's true. But then what would actually help to ease that would be just better cross-cultural understanding. That's really what's needed. And that's what the double empathy problem is talking about, is that, the two communities, the majority community, and more neurotypical normative community, and the neurodivergent autistic community, which often isn't really a community. There's just existing as two worlds. I saw somebody writing about this recently, talking about this notion that people have that autistic people are in their own world. But like, everyone's in their own world in a way, but in another way, we're just all in the same world. So please, could you just get over that idea of like, we're especially in our own world in somewhere? We are, because nothing else has been created for us. And we will struggle for that. We are struggling for it now, politically included, but we really, really want the people who don't identify as neurodivergent to make the effort on the other side, because the majority. I often use the parallel for the double empathy problem, as Damien Milton does himself, of being in a foreign country. So, like, if I was in a foreign country and working or something, and I was living on my own, and the neighbours had a barbecue. Well, yeah, I'd like to be invited, but I'm not the person to invite me to say something like, "Look, I know you don't speak the language really well, and you don't know anyone here, and you probably don't know our culture all that well. I hope you're settling in well, but so it might be too much for you to come because we'll all be gabbling on in whatever German or whatever. Do you know what I mean? But if you'd like to pop in even briefly and grab a quick burger, have one drink, you can just pop off anytime and we won't take offense, if it's too much for you. If you feel you settle in, grand, stick around. Do you know what I mean? It's like if somebody just did that, and people are more likely to do that in that context, when it's actual different culture. They're more likely to try and bridge the gap,
That's right, yeah.
And that's really what we need, is that same thing for somebody to say, well, look, we don't see much of you there, but just and so look, if barbecues aren't your thing, don't worry, but you're invited, and literally look in for 10 minutes if you want to, or whatever, or nothing, and sure, maybe we'll see you another time on a quieter occasion. Sure, we might do a cup of tea together. Like, it's just reaching out, across the divide. I think it's all about, really, isn't it?
And Milton even says that in his paper. I can't even remember when he wrote it, but it was quite some time ago, wasn't it? 10 or 15 years ago.
Oh, yes, it is. He did an article a couple of years ago called 10 Years of the Double Empathy Problem. So it's probably about 12 years ago, yeah.
Yeah. And in that original article, he even says there that relationships are situated within a power dynamic.
Yeah.
He's talking about the political, the society,
totally.
the four realms that we're talking about.
And the majority and the minority, and the default, and what's seen as different, Yeah.
And the mutuality, the responsibility is mutual to bridge the gaps.
Totally. The responsibility is mutual, but also a bit more on the majority, actually. That's the thing, because if the majority don't make an effort, it's really hard for the minority to make much headway, So the minority have to shout and wave and say, we're here. And, as gay pride marches do, we're here, we're queer, get used to it, all those kind of chants and things like that, and that captures it. But on the other hand, what that means is, and we want you to respond, as in, we're not just living in our own little world here. We want to actually, be free to belong to the larger world. And we don't have to participate in everything, but that's what we want. We just want, a bit of quid pro quo, a bit of, curiosity, a bit of reaching out from the majority side, maybe a lot, at least for a while, until things get better, So yeah, it's kind of stirred me up a bit now talking about this. All right, it always helps. These conversations always help us to kind of clarify our thoughts another little notch, I think.
Do you know, as well, with the double empathy problem thing, I just want to say as well that I had someone say to me, must be 1 or 2 years ago now, can't remember, maybe a year ago. And they said the double empathy problem, oh yes, I know what that means. That's because autistic people have a double amount of empathy. An understandable mistake to make, isn't it, to think that that's what it might mean, because we can feel empathy actually very, very intensely.
Some people have hyper empathy, some autistic people,
but it doesn't mean that, of course. And do you know what I might do is make a whole video on studying that particular paper.
Oh yeah,
because I think it'd be really useful.
That's a very interesting idea, yeah, because it's such a seminal paper, as they say, so crucial, yeah. Great idea.
And if I do, I'll put the link in this the comments to this
exactly. Yeah. No, that's a great idea.
Because we talk about it so much, and everyone does in the autistic community. It'd be really great to comb through that actual document bit by bit and chat through it. Yeah.
Very interesting idea. Yeah. We might do that with some other publications as well, maybe now and then. Yeah, important ones. But that's the top of the list, no doubt about it. For me, yeah, that's the top of the list. Crucial, wonderful insight. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think in summary, then we're saying that these four realms are important. They all are interplay with each other. They're relevant to therapy and therapists in all different ways. I mean, we've only just touched the surface, haven't we? That's, you know, how we sort of frame the course, to be thinking of all of the four realms or the domains of life and experience and impact, and that it is about contextualizing, you know, that person in all those four different ways, really, isn't it?
Definitely. And yeah, their experience and their struggles and the work we're doing together, all those things. Those, contextualizing them and conceptualizing them in those four domains. Yeah. Great.
Yeah. So we'll stop then. And thanks for today. Great talk.
Indeed. Yeah, very interesting indeed. And
see you next time.
Yeah, exactly. Great.
Bye-bye.
Oh, all right.